I just want to apologize for those that are here or in the audience via Zoom who might not be familiar with some of the Hebrew terms that we're going to be using. I will try and translate as best as I can. But in any event, you will get the gist of what I am going to mention. Tayra Mama, the erste Wort, was ihr gehört in dem Olam, the first words that you heard on this earth, then gesagt in Yiddish, was said in the language of Yiddish, your natural tongue, by the Tata, by your father, Reb Zev David Halevi. Your father and mother prepared this world for you to come into. And yet, now, as a gate to the Moilam Emes, as you're going to the world hereafter, the letzte Wort in dem Oilam, the last words that we can tell you in this world, so Oichet Zayin in Yiddish, should also be in the language of Yiddish, from Zev, from your son Zev, named after your father, Zev and Baruch David Halevi. Your father and mother are waiting for you up in heaven, as well as my father, Yaakov and Rav Leib. They are preparing for you the next stage of your journey. They have a lot of catching up to do with you, of the lives that you had here. Your death on the last days of Hanukkah, Zos Hanukkah, as my sister Yali had mentioned, is by no means a coincidence. The term Zos Hanukkah comes from the Torah portion that depicts the completion of the sanctification of the holy altar in the Jewish temple, the Mishkan. The altar was designated for animal and meal sacrificial offerings. Mommy, how much of your life was spent on that altar, sacrificing your life for God? Never once did you question why you were being tormented so much. In spite of all the questions you had of God, the true belief that you had in him was rock solid. The Yevanim, the Greeks, tried to outlaw Mila on the 8th day. Zos Hanukkah is on the 8th day as well. This is the day that we have triumphed over the Greeks, our enemies. And likewise, the Greeks, the Yevanim, tried to destroy the Beis HaMikdash and tried to overturn the Torah. And likewise, you, on this last day of Zos Hanukkah, you were able to overcome everything that they threw at you. I'm just going to try and, oh, I left the video. Okay, it's okay. I was going to play over something. My mother had an incident Friday night, and Saturday night as well were difficult nights. Sunday morning, I was so elated that she was better, and
It's already the last day.
very good. Look at you. You remember that. Very good. This was Sunday morning, and I said, please wish everybody a happy Hanukkah. She goes, it's almost over. It's the last day. And I went to my wife, Rivki, in an elation. I said, Rivki, look, she remembered. She goes, Zev, it's the 7th day of Hanukkah. My mother, though, she knew it was the last day. It was her last day. It was the last day of Hanukkah. At her 90th birthday party, my daughter Ayelet asked her, Ma, Grandma, Bobby, what message do you have for Hitler? And you responded, look at my beautiful family. The toll it took on you was great, but you had the strength and will to overcome and thrive. My mom was born in a small town, Hust in Czechoslovakia, into a very pious Hasidic family. She was the oldest of 6 children, 3 brothers, 3 sisters. Their lives were pure, centered around family, religion. There were no outside influences, no radios, no newspapers. The joke was, My grandfather, Reb Zev, used to go to the mikveh of Hasidic. He would go to the mikveh every morning, and he would come back from the mikveh, and my grandmother would ask him, "Nu Wolf, was is nice in the mikveh? What's news in the mikveh?" The mikveh was the source of information. There was no radio, no newspapers. He was an extremely intelligent person. He had the most beautiful signature. My mother relates how once she had a note excusing her from school signed in this beautiful handwriting. And he comes to pick up his daughter. And the teacher looks at this Hasidic man and sees this gorgeous. She goes, "Who signed this?" And he goes, "I signed it." "No, you didn't." Gives her a piece of paper, signs it the exact same way. A beautiful handwriting, an intelligent Talmid Chacham, worldly. People came to him for advice. This was my grandfather. Her entire family was shattered and uprooted prior to Shavuos in 1944, when her family was taken on a cattle car to Auschwitz. The selection process at Auschwitz by Dr. Mengele, Yamach Shemam V'Zichronom. My mom and her father were taken to the left to go to the labor camp. And her mother and her 5 siblings were pointed to the gas chambers. Her mother did not want to leave the children alone. My mother had the food for the trip. She had no idea where they were going. She ran after them to give them the food. Dr. Mengele Yamach Shemam V'Zichronom ran after my mother, grabbed her by the collar and said, "You dog, I told you to go on that line." And she did. She will always remember the hate in his eyes, what she was subjected to in Auschwitz, a pure Hasidic girl, to stripping naked in front of Dr. Mengele as he walked up and down and inspected all the women. It's mind-boggling what she had to endure. My mother refused to believe that her siblings were sent and her mother was sent to the gas chambers. It was only when she was sorting out the clothing and she came across her brother's outfit did she realize that they were no longer on this world. The capos, the Jewish capos, would taunt her and they would say, "Go wash yourself with the soap, the ashes from your mother." The soap was made from the ashes from the gas chambers. And that's how they would taunt her. This pure Hasidic girl. The Gemara in Yevamos, there's a brisa in the Gemara Yevamos, which is a very, very famous brisa. I'd like to just share it with you in a minute and apply it to my mother's circumstances. The brisa starts as following: Tanya, Amar Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel says, "Pam achas hayisi mahalech besfina." Once I was going on a boat. I was in a boat. V'ra'isi sfina acheres shenishbara, and I saw another boat that was shattering up and breaking into pieces. V'hayisi mitzdayer, and I was in great pain. Why? Al Talmid Chacham Shabbat, for the Talmid Chacham that was on that other boat. And who was he? Umanu, who one was he? Rabbi Akiva, the holy, the pure Rabbi Akiva, who had 24,000 students, who lost all of his students between Pesach and Shavuos. And when I came up to the dry land, Rabbi Akiva sat down before me and he started learning Torah again. This was all an allegory. How Rabbi Gamliel saw what happened to Rabbi Akiva, how his entire life was destroyed and uprooted. And he says to Rabbi Akiva, Amartalo, B'ni mihe elcha, who lifted you up from the depths of despair, who put you back on the track to be able to survive. Your entire life has been destroyed. All of your students are gone. How do you have the will and desire to continue to live? And what does Rabbi Akiva say to him? Amarle, daf shall sfina nisdamali, that a board from the ship was broken off and came to me. Okay, v'chol gal v'gal shebo alai, and every wave that came, I put my head under it, non-undoubtedly the Roshi, and I let the wave, and I rode with this board. This is what Rab Shapiro used for the Daf Yomi. Daf. What does the Daf represent? Daf represents a physical structure, a lifeboat, but it also represents a spiritual. The combination of physical and spiritual is what saved Rebbe Akiva. And so I asked my mother, how many times did I ask her, Mi ha'elcha, who lifted you up from the depths of depression following the Holocaust? You were 14 years old when you went into the gas chambers. You came out with nothing, no family, no sisters, no brothers. How could you continue to live? Mi ha'elcha. What kept you alive during the concentration camp was the knowledge that your father was alive. And that kept you going. I'm going to see my father. I'm going to see my father. And the death march and the bitter cold in Poland, sick, wearing a little sweater. She went to lie down so many times. I had enough. I can't go on. Her friends picked her up and said, your father is waiting for you. You have to go home. She went back to Berksas, her hometown, in a state of shock, looking around. Did I really live here? Did I have a life over here? Did I have parents? Did I have a family? And you waited at the train station every day as all of the survivors got off the train, and you would inquire, where is my father? Where is my father? And then you found out that your father died. Your father died on Shabbos HaGadol, a few weeks before the liberation, in the most horrific of labor camps, Ebensee in Austria. And I asked you, Mommy, why did you want to live? You lived, you survived the concentration camp because of your father. And now your father's not here. Why would you, Mi ha'elcha, who lifted you up? How could you decide you wanted to live further? And you answered what everybody in this room knows about my mother, whoever spoke to her, what Yali had mentioned, that in the cattle car going to Auschwitz, she often joked how these Rabbanim would get up and say, I'm going to teach you how to daven with kavana. She said, if you want to know how to daven kavana, you should have been on that cattle car. And there, her father is crying out to God, God, please save one of us. Our name should not be wiped out from this world. And she realized that God listened to her father's prayers, and God answered her father's prayers. And she was the one that was chosen to survive and carry on the family names. And that's what lifted her up. Mi ha'elcha, you went back to the town of Chust, where your grandparents went. And there you met the She'eris HaPleita, whoever was left over from your glorious and beautiful family. Leicheneni, Aunt Rivka, Uncle Daniel, Aunt Blima, Uncle Bensi, and of course your soulmate and cousin Rifchu, a person who you spoke to every day of your life. You and the remaining family were brought to Wilmington, Delaware by a family member, and I see your grandson here today, Rabbi Yosef Waldman, who our family is forever indebted to for providing the means and wherewithal to bring my mother and the family to Wilmington, Delaware, to start life anew in America. Uncle Joe cared for my mother more so than the others, because everybody had a brother, a sister, a mother, child. My mother was alone. A very funny story, funny, sad story. Uncle Joe was a tzaddik, a mile, a shaychet. There were no yeshivas. The kids went to Wilmington, Delaware High School. And what do you do when you're in Wilmington, Delaware High School and you're a senior? You have a prom, okay? My mother's a beautiful girl. They take her up and they dress her up in a dress, a strapless dress, and she comes running down the steps. And Leicheneni, the matriarch of the family, looks at my mother, bursts out into tears and says, I'm so happy your father doesn't have a grave, because he'd be turning over in the grave. She went to Uncle and she said, Uncle, Hitler killed 22 out of the 24 grandchildren of Chista Zeta. America is going to kill the next two if we stay in Delaware. We have to move, and we have to move to a Jewish community. And they moved to Williamsburg. And their uncle went ahead and negotiated a parnassa for my family, for my mother's family. And what was the parnassa? A delicatessen. And who is he negotiating with to purchase a delicatessen? My father's father. And there's my father schlepping up a case of soda. And he looks at my father, uncle looks at my father, and he asks my grandfather, who is this? He says, it's my son, Yankel. Uncle comes back to my mother and says, halt an Augen from him. Keep an eye on him. The Gutskeit is geschrieben auf him. The goodness is written on his face. And that was my father. In 1949 of April, they were married. My father, Jack, and Gitu. My father was an American from Boston. His Holocaust was when the Boston Red Sox lost to the New York Yankees. That was his life. But yet, he was able to merge with my mother. And after the birth of the firstborn Rivka, the nightly nightmares started coming. The Nazis were coming to take away her most prized possession, her daughter Rivki. And my father would hold her and cuddle her and say, Git, I'm here to protect you. I will protect you. Nothing will happen to you. You will be saved. My mother would say, there was never a dirty word, a bad word from his mouth ever. He was a compassionate and loving, giving man who renewed the spirit of life into my mother. Together they raised 4 beautiful children and were blessed with 16 grandchildren. And my dad passed away before seeing any great-grandchildren. My mom lived to see 29 great-grandchildren. And the 30th great-grandchild was born just 4 hours after her passing. Mihaelcha, who lifted you up after Ava passed away and after Rifchu passed away? There was nothing left in your life. Yes, you loved your children and your grandchildren, but everything from the old home, who was left? And we saw that my mother needed help. We chose to send her to Florida, the greatest move we did for her. When we called her, it would be giggly Gitu. Hi, I'm having a great time. She had so many friends, developed a love for life. Yes, she was separated from us, but it meant so much for her to be there. And she enjoyed that time that she spent in Florida. But as time wore on, my mother began to fade and slip both physically and mentally. And while in Florida, during its isolation, we had a very difficult choice to make what to do with my mother. I was blessed with an Asher's child, Rivki, who insisted that my mom live with us, together with Cheryl. Cheryl, where are you? Cheryl, please stand up. Cheryl was a 24-hour companion, a loving, compassionate, sweet person who would stroke my mother, who would be there for us day and night. Words cannot thank you, Cheryl. And for my Rivki, a thank you is a mere pittance of what you really deserve. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give you the reward that you so rightfully deserve in the Olam HaEmes. I just want to end with just a little word of what I said at her 90th birthday. We had laned, and they said, get up, say something. I had nothing prepared. I quickly looked at the Parsha, it was Parsha Sekev, and all of a sudden the words stood out, exactly my mother's life. It says, Vayancha, Vayarivecha, that, I'm sorry, I said, I put you on, God is telling the nation of Israel, I put you in the midbar for 40 years to test you. You know, when life is good and you're making a lot of money and you have all the luxuries of life, it's very easy to believe in God. Go ahead, try to believe in God when you're in a state of torture, when you're physically oppressed. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to do this to you for 40 years, okay? Laman anoschol and asrosol lodas as Hashem bivavcha hatismar mishlosav lo. I'm going to test you to see, will you keep the laws of Hashem when things aren't so good? Vayancha, vayarivecha, and I afflicted you and I made you suffer. And I gave you food that your forefathers didn't know and you didn't know. And this was my mother. My mother was being tortured. She was in Auschwitz. Never in her mouth did any tarfus go into. And here she had to eat this disgusting soup. Who knows, horse meat, who knows what was in it. This is what she was forced to eat. To see, are you now going to still believe in God? We killed your 2-year-old brother, your sisters, all innocent. Are you still going to believe in God? The Torah ends that parsha. It says, V'ochalta, and you will eat again. And so it was with my mother. She started to eat. V'savata, and you will be in a state of satiation. And her life was satiated. She married, she had children, she had grandchildren, and she had great-grandchildren. And then, after, what was supposed to say, Uveirachta es Hashem Elokecha al Aretz HaTova, that you will praise God. Whoever met my mother, what were her words? Dankim de Ribbon Shalom. Always, always, Uveirachta. No matter how much was thrown at her, she had the ability to teach us what it meant to thrive, to live with not hate, not revenge, look at the positive of everything and continue life. And that is what's been instilled to myself, my sisters, my children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. Tei nishmasa tzruah b'tzroach hayim.